Welcome to Season 2, Episode 17. Today we're going to talk about visual spatial tasking of the short-term working memory. There is a moment in change work where the question shifts. It moves from what happened to what do we do with what happened inside the brain. Now, I've said that many times, because if we are precise, the problem is not the event. The problem is the way the event is encoded in our mind. And more importantly, the way it continues to be reactivated. This is where visual spatial tasking, VST, comes in. VST is not a mindset tool, certainly not a positive thinking tool, and it's not a distraction. It's a neurological intervention, and it operates at the level of working memory. Now, here's the mechanism. When an emotionally charged memory is activated, it becomes temporarily malleable. We call that labial. And that means it's unstable and it's open to modification. This is not theoretical. This is the basis of memory reconsolidation. But here is the constraint. Working memory has limited capacity. It cannot fully process multiple high-load inputs at the same time. So if we deliberately introduce visual spatial load while the emotional memory is active, we create competition for bandwidth. And that competition matters, because visual spatial processing and emotional imagery draw on overlapping neural resources. So now the brain has a problem to solve. It cannot fully sustain the original emotional intensity while simultaneously performing the visual spatial task. And as a result, the effective charge on the memory begins to degrade and disappear. It's not suppressed, it's not avoided, it is degraded. This is the distinction. Now, we are not teaching the person to cope with the memory. We are changing the way the memory is encoded and the response it generates. And when the encoding changes, the output changes. This is why VST is paired and included in effective memory resolution. It is a key component, because activation alone is not enough, and the insight alone is not enough. We need activation plus some interference plus updating. That sequence matters. Now let me make this practical for you. A client activates a specific memory, not a category, not, oh, it happened in my childhood, but a precise moment. We observe the physiological response in the client to that memory, and that tells us we have the correct target. Now, while that memory is active, we introduce a structured visual spatial task. This could involve guided eye movements, pattern tracking, spatial sequencing, imagining different events, directed visualization that requires manipulation, not just recall. This is the key. The task must load working memory, and the highest load is in generating visual imagery. If the load is too simple, nothing changes. If it's precise and structured, the system shifts. And here's what we observe. The emotional intensity on the affective memory drops. The image loses its clarity. The physiological response reduces. And when we return to that memory a day later, it no longer produces the same output because it's lost its affective charge. That's not coping, that's actual change, and it's change that sticks. Now let's be clear about something. We do not do memory erasure. The event remains. The person can retell the story clearly, coherently, and in detail, but with no inappropriate or unwarranted negative emotional arousal. And without the charge, the nervous system no longer treats the present as if it's part of the past. And of course, regulation then returns for the client. When regulation returns, sleep improves, reactivity decreases, cognitive flexibility improves. That's all because the system is no longer allocated resources scanning for a threat from the past that's no longer present in this moment. And this connects directly to what we know about the brain. Hebbian learning tells us that repeated activation strengthens neural pathways. But the inverse is also true. When activation occurs under altered conditions, this pathway can weaken, it can update, it can go to a new location. This is neuroplasticity in action. So VST gives us a structured way to do it. It's absolutely programmed, not randomly, not philosophically, but in a mechanism. So when we talk about healing, we need to be precise. We are not talking about understanding the past. We are talking about updating and encoding the past in a way so it no longer dictates the present and it's no longer projecting into a negative future. And that is the function of visual spatial tasking. And when it's applied correctly, it does not just help people feel better in the moment, that would be coping, it changes the system that was producing the problem in the first place. And this brings us directly to the next question. If VST reduces the charge of an effective memory, what actually allows that change to hold? What is the mechanism that takes the moment of change and makes it durable? That is the domain of reconsolidation. Because it's not enough to disrupt the memory, the system must store it differently in a new, updated way. And that is what we'll examine in the next monologue.